The sky raged above the quiet town of Ashford, its fury unleashed in a torrential downpour. The rain hammered against the trees at the edge of the town, where the old cemetery stood forgotten, cloaked in darkness except for the occasional flicker of lightning. The storm seemed to have a life of its own, sweeping through the graves like an unstoppable force, twisting the overgrown weeds around the stone markers. Standing beneath a thick cloak, Henry Foster, a retired doctor in his 60s, trudged through the mud, his boots sinking deeper with each step. The oil lamp in his hand barely cut through the dark, casting fleeting shadows over the weathered tombstones. He had been coming to this cemetery for years, a ritual born of respect for the dead and a quiet hope that he might feel connected to the family he lost long ago. But tonight, something felt different. The wind howled through the towering trees, their gnarled branches creaking under the pressure. Henry paused, straining to hear over the storm's roar. Then, faint but distinct, a sound sliced through the night. A cry. A baby's cry. Welcome to the HeartForce channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through dog stories. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you're listening to this video. And if you have any stories about my loyal friend, please share them with us. His heart skipped a beat. Impossible, he thought. Who would leave a child out here, alone in this storm? With his medical instincts kicking in, Henry's steps quickened, his mind racing as he moved deeper into the cemetery. The rain-soaked graveyard seemed to stretch on endlessly, but the cry grew louder, pulling him toward an old, neglected grave nearly hidden beneath wild vines and moss. There, lying amidst the mud, was an infant wrapped in a soaked cloth, its tiny face pale and shivering, and beside it a dog. Henry's breath caught in his throat. The medium-sized dog, its golden fur drenched from the downpour, was lying next to the baby, its eyes alert and intelligent, watching Henry with an almost human expression. The dog didn't growl or bark. Instead, it simply stared at him, as if asking for help. "Good God," Henry whispered under his breath, crouching beside the baby. The child's lips were turning blue, but there was still the faintest hint of life, its chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The dog didn't move as Henry gently scooped the infant into his arms. Its eyes never left the baby, a protective stance that made Henry pause. The embroidered cloth wrapped around the child's body held a strange symbol, a delicate, five-petaled flower that seemed to glow faintly even in the storm's gloom. "Who would do this?" Henry murmured, his voice breaking as he held the baby close, trying to warm the tiny form with his coat. The dog shifted, its gaze soft but watchful, and Henry knew then that this was no coincidence. He didn't understand it yet, but something in the air told him this night would change everything. The journey back to Henry's small cottage on the edge of town was slow, treacherous, and filled with uncertainty. The storm made every step a battle. The dog, now trailing closely behind him, occasionally whined, as if urging him to hurry. Its watchful eyes never strayed from the baby in Henry's arms. As Henry made it inside, the warmth of his modest home greeted him like an old friend. He laid the baby on a blanket by the fire, his hands shaking with the urgency of the situation. The dog sat beside the cradle, its attention unwavering, as Henry worked quickly. His medical experience kicked into high gear as he dried the baby and checked for signs of life. The child, though small and fragile, was showing signs of resilience. It wasn't just any child. And the dog? It wasn't just any dog. Henry ran his fingers through the dog's matted fur, a sense of gratitude flowing through him. "Thank you," he said quietly, and for a moment, the dog's eyes softened, as if understanding. Henry's thoughts were a whirlwind of questions. Who had left this child in the graveyard, and why? And what was the significance of the strange symbol? Why was this dog so devoted to the child? It was all too much to process, and yet, as he watched the dog keep its vigilant watch over the baby, Henry felt something stirring deep within him, something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. In that moment, amidst the storm and the uncertainty, Henry Foster made a silent promise. He would protect this child. He would protect them both, whatever it cost. As the storm raged outside, Henry sat back in his old rocking chair, exhausted but unable to sleep. The baby slept soundly now, wrapped in blankets near the fire, and the dog lay beside her, alert and watchful. Henry's mind swirled with thoughts of the past, of his wife, Clara, and their daughter, Lily, both lost in a tragic car accident 5 years ago. The pain still lingered, sharp and ever-present, but in this strange, impossible moment with the baby and the dog, he felt something else. He felt alive. He felt needed. The dog, which he had begun calling Shadow due to its quiet, protective presence, seemed to sense the shift in Henry's heart. Every so often, it would look up at him, as if reassuring him that they were in this together. And just as Henry was about to drift into a much-needed sleep, he heard it again, the faint cry of the baby. His heart jumped in his chest. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was something more familiar. Hope. The early morning light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the small cottage where Henry and his unexpected guests had found shelter. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with the scent of rain and wet earth. Shadow, the golden dog, stood vigil by the door, his ears perked and eyes scanning the horizon. Henry, though weary, felt a sense of purpose that had eluded him for years. The baby, whom he had named Hope, had survived the night. She slept soundly in the makeshift crib beside the hearth, her tiny chest rising and falling in rhythmic breaths. Shadow's protective posture never wavered. It remained by the crib, watching over her with an almost unnatural dedication. Henry's medical training told him that Hope was a fighter, though small and fragile. She had a strength that was undeniable, but that wasn't the only thing that intrigued him. The strange 5-petaled flower, symbol embroidered into the cloth she had been wrapped and gnawed at his mind. It wasn't just a decorative pattern. It held meaning, a significance that eluded him, yet felt somehow familiar. As Henry moved to prepare breakfast, his thoughts drifted to the night before. The mystery of Hope's origins weighed heavily on him, but a greater question loomed in his mind. Who was this dog? What kind of training had Shadow undergone to be so dedicated to a child he had never met? The morning passed quietly, the sun rising higher in the sky as the storm clouds broke apart. Henry didn't go to the village today. He stayed in his cottage, nursing his aching heart and adjusting to the strange new reality that had presented itself to him. After breakfast, Henry made a decision. He could no longer remain in the dark about this child. His instinct told him that Hope was no ordinary baby, and Shadow was no ordinary dog. There was something more at play here, something that had brought them together in this strange, unexplainable way. He needed to find answers. The village of Ashford was small, its cobblestone streets lined with quaint shops and homes. Most of the villagers knew Henry, or at least knew of him. He had spent over 30 years as the town's pediatrician, offering both medical advice and a listening ear to the families who came to him. Though his practice had closed after his wife and daughter's tragic deaths, he was still a fixture in the community, respected, if somewhat distant. Now, however, Henry found himself at the crossroads of his past and an uncertain future. He couldn't explain to anyone why he had taken in the abandoned child or the dog. The village would never understand. But deep down, he knew this was his purpose now. Henry made his way through the village, Shadow following closely behind. The dog had become an almost constant presence in his life, never straying far from his side. It was as if Shadow understood the gravity of the situation and the responsibility Henry had taken on. It was more than loyalty. It was something deeper, something bound by fate. He first visited Mrs. Thompson, the kind widow who ran the village's general store. She was one of the few people who still called on him for advice, bringing him homemade bread and vegetables in exchange for a quick checkup now and then. "Henry, what on earth is going on?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her eyebrows raised in concern as she saw him enter the store with the baby cradled in his arms and Shadow by his side. "Is that a baby?" Henry nodded, careful to keep his emotions in check. "Yes." He replied quietly. I found her last night, out in the cemetery. Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened, and she took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Found her? In the cemetery? I know it sounds impossible, Henry said, his voice low. But there's something I don't understand. She was left there, alone. And this dog, he paused, his gaze shifting to Shadow, who had settled by the door, watchful but calm. This dog is different. It's been protecting her. Mrs. Thompson glanced at the dog, then back at Henry. You're saying this dog has been looking after her? Yes, Henry replied, his voice steady. And I intend to find out more about them both. I just don't know where to start. Mrs. Thompson crossed her arms, looking thoughtful. Well, you know, I've had a few contacts in the village, but you might want to speak with Sarah Johnson, the midwife. She's had experience with babies and, well, unusual circumstances. Unusual circumstances? Henry echoed. Trust me, Mrs. Thompson said with a knowing smile. She's dealt with more than one mystery over the years. She's a good woman. If anyone can help you understand this, it's her. Later that afternoon, Henry made his way to Sarah Johnson's small cottage on the outskirts of the village. Sarah had been a midwife for over 20 years, delivering babies and offering guidance to young mothers. She was well respected in the village, though a bit of a recluse, preferring the quiet of her home to the hustle and bustle of the town center. When Sarah opened the door, she greeted Henry with a warm smile, but there was an unmistakable curiosity in her eyes as she saw the baby in his arms. Henry, she said softly, I wasn't expecting company today. And, what's this? She gestured toward Hope and then to Shadow, who had remained outside, sitting patiently by the door. Henry explained what had happened the previous night, recounting the cry he had heard, the strange symbol on the cloth, and the dog's unusual protective behavior. Sarah listened intently, her face serious. You're not the first person to find something like this, she murmured. But a baby in a cemetery? That's rare. Do you think it's connected to something dangerous? Henry asked, his voice tight with concern. I don't know yet, Sarah replied, stepping forward to take a closer look at Hope. The baby stirred in Henry's arms, her tiny hand reaching out, as if sensing Sarah's presence. But I have seen this symbol before. Henry's heart skipped a beat. Where? Sarah hesitated, glancing toward Shadow, who was now pacing near the edge of the property. It's a family symbol. Well, I've seen it in a few old records, but it's been a long time since I've come across it. And as for the dog, she sighed. That dog isn't just trained to protect. It's been trained for something more. Henry's mind raced. Trained for what? I don't know yet, Sarah said, her voice trailing off. But if you're serious about finding answers, Henry, you'll need to look deeper. This child, and that dog, they're part of a much bigger story. And it's a story that's not over yet. As Henry left Sarah's cottage, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't turn back now. The mystery of Hope's origins had only deepened, and the role Shadow played in her life was far from over. But with Sarah's words echoing in his mind, he also knew that his next step would take him deeper into a world of secrets he wasn't sure he was ready for. The weeks following Henry's meeting with Sarah Johnson were filled with questions that seemed to multiply as the days passed. Hope was thriving under his care, but every time he looked at her, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her than met the eye. She was a child, a vulnerable little soul in need of love and protection. Yet there was an undeniable spark in her eyes, as though she carried the weight of a secret far beyond her years. Shadow, too, remained ever-present, steadfast in his protection of the baby. But the dog's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and Henry could sense it. Something was unsettling him. At night, Shadow would pace by the windows, growling softly at any movement in the distance, his instincts sharp and unwavering. During the day, he would lie beside Hope's crib, always alert, always watchful, yet calm. It was as if the dog knew what Henry was only beginning to understand. This child was in grave danger, and that danger was drawing closer. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of work on his medical records, Henry decided to pay another visit to Sarah. He needed answers, and the time had come to dig deeper into the mystery of the baby the symbol on her cloth, and the dog's unwavering loyalty. Sarah had been hesitant to discuss anything more during their last meeting, but Henry could sense that the time for silence was over. When he arrived at Sarah's cottage, she greeted him with a warm, welcoming smile, but there was something different in her eyes, a hint of concern, as though she was preparing herself for something she knew was coming. "Come in, Henry," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I've been expecting you." As Henry stepped inside, Sarah motioned for him to sit at the small wooden table by the window. The room was warm, filled with the rich scent of herbs drying by the hearth and the soft flicker of candlelight. It was cozy, intimate, a place where one could easily forget the outside world. "I've been thinking," Henry began, his voice low, "about hope, about the symbol, the dog, everything. I can't shake the feeling that there's something I'm missing. Something important." Sarah nodded slowly, her expression serious. "You're not wrong, Henry. There is something more to this than just a simple case of abandonment. But you need to understand that the truth, it's not something most people are ready for." "What do you mean?" Henry asked, his heart racing. "What truth?" Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the window where Shadow lay outside, his eyes locked on the horizon. It was as if the dog could sense something in the air, something that Henry hadn't yet perceived. "There's a story behind that child, Henry. A story that's been hidden for a long time. And it's not just her story, it's Shadow's too. They're connected in ways I don't fully understand, but I do know one thing. Their safety is of the utmost importance. If the wrong people find out about them, everything will change." Henry leaned forward, his brow furrowed with worry. "Who are these people? What do you know about them?" Sarah took a deep breath, and for a moment, her eyes seemed distant, as though she were searching for words that would make sense of the tangled web of secrets she was about to reveal. "They're families, Henry, families with influence, power, and wealth. Families that will do anything to maintain control. Hope's birth is not an accident. It was planned, but not by anyone with good intentions." Henry's pulse quickened. "Are you saying someone planned her abandonment?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Yes, but it's more complicated than that. Hope's mother, Rebecca, was part of one of these families, one of the powerful families that controls everything in this town. And the people behind her disappearance, and now Hope's, are part of something much darker. The dog, Shadow, he was trained specifically to protect Hope, and he's been waiting for someone like you to find her. Someone who could protect her and understand what's at stake." Henry's mind raced. This was no longer just about finding the truth. It was about survival. For him, for Hope, for Shadow. The family that had orchestrated this web of deceit would stop at nothing to reclaim what they believed was theirs. "I don't understand," Henry said, shaking his head. "Why would anyone want to hurt a baby?" "Because of what she represents," Sarah said, her voice cold and calculating. "Hope is not just any child. She's the key to something much bigger, something that could change everything for the families involved. And that's why she's been hidden, and why the dog is here, protecting her. It's not just instinct, Henry. It's by design." Henry felt his stomach churn. He had known that there was something special about Hope, but this was something else. Something that could destroy everything he had worked for. The quiet life he had built in the wake of his family's tragic death was slipping away, replaced by a dangerous game of cat and mouse. "What can I do?" Henry asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How do I protect her from this?" Sarah looked at him with a heavy gaze, her face lined with years of experience and hidden sorrow. "You have to go to the source. The families that control this town, they're the ones who hold the key to everything. If you want to keep Hope safe, you have to confront them. You have to find out who's behind this and why. And you need to do it before they find her first." Henry's heart pounded in his chest. "I won't let them take her," he said firmly. "I won't let them hurt her." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. "Then you have to prepare yourself, Henry. This is bigger than anything you've ever dealt with before. And it's not just your life on the line. It's hers." As Henry left Sarah's cottage, a cold wind began to stir, carrying with it the scent of something far darker than the rain-soaked earth. He glanced at Shadow, who stood by the door, his posture tense, eyes scanning the horizon. The dogs seemed to know what was coming, seemed to understand that the next steps they took would either bring them closer to safety or lead them directly into danger. Hope, the baby who had entered his life under the most mysterious of circumstances, was now the key to a story that was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And no matter the cost, Henry knew one thing for certain. He would protect her, even if it meant confronting the very families that controlled everything he had known. The days following his conversation with Sarah Johnson were a blur of tension and quiet resolve. Henry spent most of his time in his small cabin, preparing for the storm that was surely coming. He couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in around him, that every step he took to protect Hope and Shadow brought him closer to a confrontation he wasn't sure he was ready for. But there was no turning back now. Hope was thriving. Her laugh had become a sound that filled the cabin with warmth, a contrast to the cold reality that was slowly seeping in. Her first words, "Papa" and "dog," brought tears to Henry's eyes each time she said them, as if the universe itself was reminding him of the love he had lost and the love he had found. But Shadow was different. The dog's once playful nature had become consumed by a relentless vigilance. At night, he no longer slept peacefully. He would pace the cabin, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every creak in the floorboards. He had become more than a protector. He was a guardian, watching over Hope with an intensity that only deepened as the days went by. Henry knew that the Blackwoods were coming. The wealth and power of their family were not to be underestimated, and their reach stretched far beyond the small village that had once been his quiet refuge. The dog's heightened senses, the way it reacted to the faintest sounds outside, spoke to the danger that loomed just beyond their doorstep. Then came the call, the one Henry had been dreading. A sharp knock at the door broke the silence one afternoon, and, as he opened it, he found a tall, stern-looking man standing before him. The man was dressed in a black suit, his demeanor businesslike and cold. "Dr. Miller?" the man asked, his voice lacking any warmth. "Yes?" Henry replied, his hand instinctively resting on the doorknob, ready to close it if necessary. He could feel the tension in his chest tighten. "My name is Richard Hale. I represent the Blackwood family. They're inquiring about the child you're caring for." "Hope Miller," he said, his eyes scanning the cabin as though he were assessing everything within it, searching for any clue that might give away Henry's plans. Henry stiffened. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Hale's expression didn't change. "We know who she is. The Blackwoods have been searching for her for quite some time, and they've asked that you turn her over to them." "Turn her over?" Henry's voice grew harder. "She's not going anywhere. Dr. Miller," Hale continued, "this isn't a request. It's a formal notice. You've been illegally harboring a child who belongs to my clients. There are documents, you see, that suggest her rightful place is with the Blackwoods. We have every intention of bringing this matter to court, and if it comes to that, I assure you the law will be on their side." Henry's jaw tightened. He glanced back at the cabin, at Hope's crib, where the soft sound of her breathing filled the room. Shadow, sensing the threat, stood beside Henry, growling low in his throat, his eyes never leaving Hale. "I don't care what the Blackwoods say," Henry said, his voice steady but firm. "Hope is mine. She's my daughter now, and no one is taking her from me." Hale seemed to consider this for a moment before offering a thin smile. "I think you'll find that things are not as simple as you believe, Dr. Miller. The Blackwoods have resources you cannot imagine, and they will stop at nothing to get what they want. We'll be back, and we'll bring the full force of the law with us." With that, Hale turned on his heel and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the ground. Henry stood there for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the threat bearing down on him. Shadow, sensing Henry's distress, moved closer, his head resting gently against his leg. The bond between them had deepened over the past few months, and in that moment, it felt unbreakable. Henry wasn't alone, not anymore. Later that evening, Henry sat at the small wooden table, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee cup. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. But inside the cabin, it was quiet. Hope was asleep in her crib, her small form nestled in the warmth of her blankets. unaware of the storm brewing outside. Shadow lay at his feet, his eyes alert, his body tense. The dog had not relaxed since the confrontation with Hale, and Henry knew that the threat was real. He was a doctor, trained to care for others. But he was also a man who had lost everything once. And now, with hope, he had something worth fighting for. "I won't let them take you," Henry whispered to himself, his voice a promise more than a declaration. "You're mine. You're safe here." The silence stretched on for a few more minutes before Henry stood up and moved to the window. He peered out into the darkness, the silhouette of the trees swaying in the wind. He knew they couldn't stay here forever. The Blackwoods would come again, and next time, they wouldn't be so easily deterred. As he turned to go back inside, he noticed a flash of movement, a figure barely visible in the darkness, just outside the edge of the forest. His heart skipped a beat. Was it one of the Blackwoods' men, or something else? Shadow's hackles rose immediately, his low growl filling the cabin. Henry's mind raced. He couldn't risk waiting to find out. He needed to act, to move Hope and Shadow to safety before it was too late. As Henry prepared for what might be their final escape, a plan began to form in his mind. The time had come to confront the Blackwoods and take Hope's future into his own hands, no matter the cost. The storm outside had turned violent, wind howling through the trees as Henry prepared for the unimaginable. His heart raced, but it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was determination. As he checked the small bag he had packed with supplies, his thoughts raced. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protection. Hope was his daughter, and Shadow was her guardian. Just as much a part of their family as any person could be. "Come on, boy," Henry whispered, giving Shadow a gentle pat on the head. The dog's gaze met his, steady and unwavering, as though it understood what was at stake. Hope slept soundly in her crib, completely unaware of the dangers closing in. Henry had always worked in medicine, where quick decisions and rational thinking had been his tools. But this was different. This was personal. This was love. The knock at the door came just as the first light of dawn began to break through the storm. Henry's hand instinctively reached for the old hunting rifle he kept by the door. It wasn't for hunting. It was for situations like this. He knew it wouldn't come to violence if he could help it, but the Blackwoods had pushed him too far. They had threatened his family, and now there was no turning back. He opened the door slowly, and there they stood, Alexander and Victoria Blackwood, flanked by two of their burly security men. They looked as polished as ever. Their expensive clothes still immaculate despite the rain that poured from the sky, but their eyes held a cold, calculating malice. "We're here for Hope," Alexander said, his tone icy. He held out a stack of papers, the kind of documents that were meant to look official, meant to give their claims weight. Henry stood firm, his back straight. "She's not going anywhere." Victoria's lips twisted into a false smile. "You don't understand, Dr. Miller. This isn't just about you or me. It's about the future of a family, of an heir who's been kept from us." "An heir?" Henry's voice shook with barely contained rage. "She's a child, not a pawn in your games. This is about love, not money. And you're not taking her." Shadow, ever the protector, positioned himself between Henry and the Blackwoods. His body tensed, and his growl rumbled low and dangerous. The dog had never been more than a loyal companion, but now, as Henry's most trusted ally, Shadow became something else entirely, a force of nature that refused to allow harm to come to his family. Victoria recoiled slightly at the growl, but Alexander remained unfazed. "You're delusional, Miller," he sneered. "This charade is over." He made a subtle gesture, and one of the security men reached for the door. But Shadow was quicker. With a snarl, the dog lunged forward, snapping at the intruder's arm. The man stumbled back, swearing in pain. Henry stood his ground, not even flinching at the confrontation. "You'll leave this place," he said calmly, "or I will make sure you never get near Hope again." The Blackwoods exchanged a brief glance, and for the first time, doubt flickered in their eyes. This wasn't the easy victory they had assumed it would be. They had underestimated Henry, Shadow, and what they were willing to protect. A tense silence hung in the air. broken only by the growl of the dog and the patter of rain against the cabin's roof. And then, with a look of seething frustration, Alexander spoke. "This isn't over, Dr. Miller. You can't hide forever." He turned sharply, signaling his men to follow. Victoria hesitated, her eyes lingering on Hope's crib, but she said nothing. In the end, they turned and left, retreating into the storm with their tails between their legs. Henry let out a long breath, his whole body shaking. He had faced down the Blackwoods and won, for now. But the battle wasn't over. It never would be, not as long as they still breathed. Later that night, as the storm subsided and the rain tapered off, Henry sat on the porch, watching the fading light of day. Shadow lay beside him, ever watchful, while Hope rested inside, blissfully unaware of the danger they had just faced. For the first time in a long time, Henry allowed himself a moment of peace. They had survived, but there was more to come. He could feel it, like a storm on the horizon, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as a family. "Thank you," Henry whispered to Shadow, his voice soft with gratitude. The dog's ears perked, and he rested his head on Henry's knee, a silent promise of loyalty. This journey has been one of incredible transformation for both Henry and Shadow. They have fought for the love and safety of a child against the odds and the shadows of their past. Through love, sacrifice, and determination, they have shown that family is not defined by blood, but by the bonds we choose to form. The Blackwoods' attempt to take Hope was more than just about control. It was about denying a future. But now, Hope is surrounded by love, loyalty, and the safety of a family that will stop at nothing to protect her. What did you think of this story? Which part touched your heart the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the HeartForce channel and hit the notification bell to get more touching stories about the power of love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds we form with those we hold dear.